Hidden away as her family's most shameful secret, a blind Omega lived a life entirely in the dark. Yet, in a twist of fate, this lowly outcast became the sole fixation of the realm's most ruthless Alpha King. Once he caught her scent, no wall was strong enough to keep him from claiming the one girl he truly saw. In the medieval highlands of the north, the Winterborn pack was renowned for producing the most ferocious warriors and the most stunningly beautiful women. Ruled by the iron fist of Alpha Cedric, the pack prided itself on perfection. Weakness was not just frowned upon, it was actively excised. Thus, the existence of Juliet was a stain. Alpha Cedric worked tirelessly to scrub from the annals of their history. Juliet was his youngest daughter, born an Omega, a rarity in itself, but one that could have been politically useful had she not been born completely blind. In a world where a wolf's worth was measured by their prowess in a hunt, a blind wolf was considered cursed by the moon goddess, an omen of famine and death. From the moment the village healer realized the cloudy film over the infant's eyes would never clear, Cedric had made his decision. She would not be killed for kinslaying, carried a heavier curse, but she would not exist either. For 20 years, Juliet lived in the damp, cavernous cellars beneath the Winterborn ancestral keep. She was the ghost of the estate. While her older sister, Beatrice, was paraded in silks and jewels, trained in the arts of seduction and diplomacy, Juliet wore rough-spun wool and learned the shape of the world through the pads of her fingers and the soles of her bare feet. Despite her isolation, Juliet was not truly alone. Deprived of her sight, her wolf had compensated by elevating her remaining senses to supernatural heights. She could hear the distinct heartbeat of a mouse scurrying behind the stone walls. She could smell the difference between a lie and the truth in the sweat of the servants who silently brought her meager meals. She mapped the entire estate not by sight, but by the drafts of air, the creak of the floorboards, and the scent of rain, damp earth, and roasted meats filtering down from the kitchens above. The drama began on a harsh Tuesday in late autumn. The stone floors of Juliet's cellar vibrated with an unusual, frantic energy. Boots pounded above her in a rhythmic panic. The scent of beeswax, expensive lavender soaps, and roasting venison permeated the cracks in the ceiling. Something monumental was happening. That evening, the heavy, iron-reinforced door to her cellar groaned open. The scent of strong pine and aggressive dominance flooded the room. It was her father, Alpha Cedric. "Get up," Cedric barked, his voice laced with the underlying growl that commanded submission. Juliet rose from her straw mattress, her unseeing milky blue eyes cast downward. "Yes, Alpha." "Tomorrow, King Alaric arrives," Cedric sneered, pacing the small confines of the room. The air grew thick with his anxiety. "The sovereign of the 5 realms is seeking a Luna. He is touring the noble houses, and Winterborn is his prime stop. I have spent years preparing your sister, Beatrice, for this exact moment. She will be queen." Juliet kept her head bowed. She knew of King Alaric through the whispers of the servants. They called him the Iron Wolf. He had conquered the southern rebel packs at the age of 18 and had ruled with a ruthless, untamed aggression ever since. He was a tyrant to his enemies, a god to his people. "You are to remain absolutely silent," Cedric commanded, grabbing her chin with rough fingers, his nails biting into her skin. "I am having extra locks placed on this door. If the king's retinue hears so much as a whisper from this cellar, if they discover that the great Alpha Cedric sired a defective, blind Omega, I will not wait for the moon goddess to take you. I will end you myself. Do you understand?" "I understand, father," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. He dropped her face in disgust and turned away. "Beatrice's destiny is at hand. Do not let your curse ruin her light." The door slammed shut, and the heavy thud of a new iron beam dropping into place echoed through the darkness. Juliet sank back onto her bed. She didn't want the king. She didn't want the throne. She only wanted to feel the sun on her face, just once, without the threat of death hanging over her head. But as the night wore on, Her wolf stirred uneasily within her, scratching at the edges of her mind. A heavy, magnetic pull was beginning to form in the air, sending static shocks through her fingertips. Something ancient was awakening. The arrival of King Alaric shook the very foundations of the keep. Even locked deep in the cellar, Juliet could feel the tremors in the earth as 200 royal guards rode into the courtyard. The air pressure changed. The sheer magnitude of the king's alpha aura seeped through the stone walls, thick and intoxicating. It smelled of ozone, lightning, and deep, ancient forests. Upstairs, the grand hall was a spectacle of wealth. Alpha. Cedric had spared no expense. Tapestries depicting the moon goddess hung from the rafters, and the tables groaned under the weight of roasted boars, spiced wines, and honeyed fruits. At the center of it all stood Beatrice, dripping in gold and crimson silk, her heavy rose perfume masking the nervous sweat of her family. King Alaric sat at the head of the table, looking profoundly bored. He was a mountain of a man, clad in dark leather and steel, his sharp jawline covered in a dark, neatly trimmed beard. His piercing amber eyes scanned the room with the detached apathy of a predator, surrounded by insignificant prey. He had visited 6 packs in the last month. He had been offered countless beautiful, ambitious female alphas and betas. None of them made his wolf stir. None of them were hers. "My king," Beatrice purred, stepping forward with a silver goblet of wine. She leaned in, ensuring the plunging neckline of her dress did its job. "Winterborn is honored by your presence. We hope the feast pleases you." Alaric took the goblet, his gaze flicking over her. She was beautiful, yes, but her scent was cloying, artificial, and underneath it lay a bitter tang of cruelty and vanity. His wolf, usually restless, curled up in disdain. "The feast is adequate," Alaric rumbled, his voice deep enough to rattle the plates. He set the wine down without drinking it. "But I did not ride for 3 weeks to eat roasted pig. Alpha Cedric. I came to find a mate." Cedric beamed, oblivious to the king's distaste. "And I present to you my finest daughter, Beatrice. A true alpha female, strong, capable, and ready to stand by your side." Alaric stood slowly. The casual movement silenced the entire hall. The music ceased abruptly. The king stepped down from the dais, towering over Beatrice. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, intending to formally reject her and take his leave. But as he drew breath, a different scent slipped through the overpowering smell of roast meat, heavy perfumes, and sweat. It was faint, so faint it was almost a ghost. Wildflowers, rain on warm earth, crushed cedar. Alaric's eyes snapped open, blazing with an intense, luminous amber light. His wolf, completely dormant a second ago, suddenly slammed against the forefront of his mind, howling with a feral, possessive fury. "Mate." The king pushed past Beatrice so violently she stumbled into a servant. He ignored the gasps of the nobles. He was no longer a king, attending a banquet. He was a beast, tracking a scent. He strode toward the back of the great hall, his boots echoing ominously. "Your Majesty?" Cedric called out, his voice trembling as panic set in. "The royal chambers are this way." Alaric didn't answer. He followed the invisible thread of rain and wildflowers. It led him down a dark, narrow stone corridor behind the kitchens. The air grew damp and cold. Cedric and his guards were scrambling behind him, their faces pale with terror. "My king! Stop!" Cedric pleaded, stepping in front of a heavy, iron-bound door. "There is nothing down there. Just the cellars. Old grain and rats." Alaric stopped. The scent was pouring out from the cracks of the door, overwhelming his senses. It was pure, untainted, and utterly intoxicating. He looked down at the heavy new iron lock securing the door from the outside. "Rats do not require external locks." "Alpha Cedric," Alaric growled, his voice dropping into a deadly, monstrous register. Without waiting for a key, Alaric gripped the iron crossbar. With a sickening crunch of metal and a roar of pure alpha strength, he tore the lock from the stone wall. The heavy wooden door swung open, crashing against the inside wall. Alaric stepped into the gloom. At first, he saw nothing but shadows and old barrels. But then, curled into a corner on a pathetic pile of straw, was a girl. She was trembling, dressed in rags, her silver-white hair tumbling in chaotic waves down her back. As Alaric approached, she scrambled backward, pressing herself against the cold stone. "Please," she whispered, her voice like wind chimes. "I didn't make a sound." "I swear, Father, I didn't make a sound." Alaric's heart stopped. She was staring in his direction, but her beautiful, milky blue eyes were unfocused, sightless. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She was an Omega. She was blind, and her own family had locked her away like an animal. A low, thunderous snarl ripped from Alaric's chest, vibrating through the cellar. Behind him, Cedric fell to his knees, knowing his life was forfeit. Alaric dropped to one knee in the dirt, completely ignoring the filth on his royal leathers. He slowly reached out, telegraphing his movement so she could feel the air shift. "Do not be afraid," he murmured, his voice softening to a velvet purr that shocked his own guards. "I am not your father." Juliet flinched as his massive, calloused hand brushed her cheek. But the moment their skin touched, a spark of electricity exploded between them, lighting up the dark cellar. The mate bond snapped into place, absolute and unbreakable. Juliet gasped, her sightless eyes widening. Her wolf, suppressed for 20 years, sang out in joyous recognition. Alaric stood, gathering her delicate, shivering form into his arms. He lifted her effortlessly, cradling her against his armored chest. He turned to face the doorway, where Cedric, Beatrice, and the entire court stood in horrified silence. The king's amber eyes burned with a murderous promise. "You kept my queen in a cage," Alaric declared, his voice echoing with lethal intent. "Pray to the moon goddess, Cedric, because when I return, there will be nothing left of Winterborn but ash." The journey to Oakhaven, the royal capital, was a sensory overload for Juliet. For 20 years, her world had been a 10-by-10 stone cellar. Now, it was a sprawling carriage lined with crushed velvet, pulled by massive war horses whose hooves thundered against the cobbled roads. King Alaric refused to let her ride in a separate carriage. He kept her beside him, his large, warm hand constantly enveloping hers, grounding her in the chaotic new world. He was a paradox to her. The servants and guards whispered about his brutality, his ruthless battlefield tactics, and his unyielding demeanor. Yet, to Juliet, he was nothing but a gentle giant. He described the landscapes to her, the rolling green hills, the towering pine forests, the shimmering blue of the capital's central river, painting pictures in her mind with his deep, gravelly voice. "You don't have to do this," Juliet said softly on the third day of their journey, her fingers lightly tracing the embroidered crest on his velvet cloak. "I am a blind Omega. The noble houses will never accept me as their Luna. They will see me as a weakness to your reign." Alaric's jaw tightened. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the crown of her silver hair. "Let them look at you and see weakness. It will be the last mistake they ever make. You are not a weakness, Juliet. You survived 20 years in the dark with a pack of cowards trying to break you. You are the strongest wolf I have ever met." When they arrived at the Oakhaven Citadel, the reception was exactly as Juliet had feared. Though she couldn't see the sneers, she could hear them. She could hear the whispered insults echoing off the marble pillars of the throne room. She could smell the sour stench of jealousy and contempt emanating from the high-born alphas and betas who had spent their lives vying for Alaric's attention. The most dangerous among them was Lord Reginald, the king's uncle and master of the royal treasury, and his daughter, Lady Seraphina. Seraphina had long been considered the unofficial future queen, and Juliet's sudden arrival shattered her ambitions. During Juliet's first formal banquet, the hostility was palpable. Alaric had draped her in the finest silks, the deep emerald fabric contrasting beautifully with her silver hair. She sat at his right hand, poised and silent, relying on her heightened senses to navigate the meal. Lady Seraphina, seated nearby, saw an opportunity. "Tell me, Lady Juliet." Seraphina's voice dripped with fake sweetness, echoing loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "How does one rule a kingdom when one cannot even see the faces of her subjects? How will you know who lies to you and who tells the truth? Or will our king have to hold your hand through every royal decree?" The hall fell dead silent. Alaric gripped his goblet so hard the metal warped under his fingers. He opened his mouth to order Seraphina's tongue removed, but Juliet placed a gentle hand over his forearm, stopping him. Juliet turned her sightless eyes exactly in Seraphina's direction, her posture immaculate. "Sight is a fascinating thing, Lady Seraphina," Juliet said, her voice calm and carrying perfectly across the silent hall. "People who rely only on their eyes are so easily fooled by a smile or a beautiful dress. But the eyes cannot see the accelerated heartbeat of a liar. They cannot smell the bitter tang of envy disguised as a polite question. I may not see your face, Lady Seraphina, but I know exactly who you are." A collective gasp rippled through the nobility. Seraphina's scent spiked with humiliation and rage. Alaric's chest rumbled with a low chuckle of profound pride, and he kissed the back of Juliet's hand in front of the entire court. But humiliation breeds desperate actions. Lord Reginald knew that if Juliet solidified her place as queen, his family's power would wane. The blind Omega needed to be removed before the mating ceremony was completed. 2 nights later, the citadel was gripped by a torrential thunderstorm. The heavy rain masked the sound of footsteps, and the thunder drowned out the usual nocturnal rhythms of the castle. Alaric was asleep beside Juliet, exhausted from a grueling day of border disputes. Juliet lay awake, listening to the rain. But beneath the rhythmic drumming of water against the glass, her ears caught something else. A subtle hiss. The sound of oiled leather sliding against stone. The faint, metallic whisper of a blade being drawn from a scabbard. Her nose twitched. The scent of rain was suddenly overpowered by the smell of wet wool, sour sweat, and wolfsbane, a deadly poison to their kind. Someone was in the room. The assassin was highly trained, masking their heartbeat with a slow breathing technique, stepping only on the solid stone joints of the floor to avoid creaking boards. A normal wolf, relying on sight in the pitch-black room, would have been slaughtered in their sleep. But Juliet lived in the dark. The dark was her domain. She mapped the assassin's movements perfectly. 5 paces from the bed. 4 paces. They were aiming for Alaric's side. Just as the assassin lunged, raising a dagger coated in lethal wolfsbane, Juliet moved with terrifying speed. She didn't scream. There was no time. Instead, she threw her entire body weight against Alaric, violently shoving the massive king off the edge of the bed. Thwack! The poisoned blade buried itself deep into the mattress, inches from where Alaric's heart had been a fraction of a second before. Alaric hit the floor, instantly awake. His alpha instincts erupted. He shifted mid-air, a monstrous, black-furred beast tearing through his clothes. In the span of a single heartbeat, the room filled with the sounds of snarling and the sickening crunch of bone as the king fell upon the assassin, disarming and subduing him before the man could even scream. Guards burst into the room moments later, holding torches that illuminated the chaos. The assassin, bearing the hidden sigil of Lord Reginald's house, lay bleeding and broken on the floor. Alaric, shifting back to his human form, paid the man no mind. He rushed to the bed, pulling Juliet into his arms, his heart hammering with terror. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I am fine," she breathed, burying her face in his chest. Alaric looked at the dagger buried in the mattress, then down at his mate. The entire court had called her weak. They had called her blind. But in the pitch black of the night, when the deadliest king in the world was vulnerable, it was the blind Omega who saw the blade coming. It was the girl from the cellar who had saved the king. As the guards dragged the assassin away, Alaric held her tight, a deadly vow forming in his mind. The court thought they could play games with his mate. It was time for the Iron Wolf to remind them why he sat on the throne. And the purging of the noble houses was about to begin. The morning after the assassination attempt, the Oakhaven citadel did not wake to the gentle tolling of the dawn bells. It woke to the blood-chilling, synchronized howling of the royal guard. The sound vibrated through the cobblestones and shattered the morning mist, a primal declaration of war from within the castle walls. King Alaric had ordered the great iron gates of the citadel sealed. No one was to enter, no one was to leave. In the great hall, the nobility was herded together like frightened sheep. Lord Reginald stood among them, his face a mask of practiced outrage, while Lady Seraphina clung to his arm, projecting an aura of terrified innocence. They had expected to wake up to the news of a dead king and a slaughtered Omega, paving the way for Reginald to seize the throne as the closest living alpha relative. Instead, they stood under the menacing glare of a sovereign who looked ready to burn the world to the ground. Alaric sat upon the obsidian throne, his posture rigid, his amber eyes glowing with a feral, unnatural light. Beside him, seated on a slightly smaller throne of carved mahogany, was Juliet. She wore a simple gown of pale ivory, completely unbothered by the suffocating tension in the room. To the nobles, she looked fragile. To Alaric, she was the bedrock, holding back his monstrous fury. The broken, bloodied body of the assassin was thrown onto the marble floor at the base of the dais. The heavy thud made several high-born ladies shriek. "This filth," Alaric's voice was a low, guttural rumble that seemed to emanate from the stone itself, "was found in my bedchamber, armed with wolfsbane, aiming for my heart." A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Lord Reginald stepped forward, pressing a hand to his chest. "My king, this is a horrific tragedy averted. We must scour the city. The rebel factions from the south must have infiltrated the citadel." "Do not insult my intelligence, uncle," Alaric snarled, his lips curling back to reveal elongated canines. "The rebels do not possess the passcodes to the inner sanctum. This rat was let in by someone in this room." "Surely you do not suspect your own loyal court?" Seraphina cried out, stepping beside her father. She turned her gaze toward Juliet, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent. "Perhaps, Your Majesty, the threat came from the outside, brought in by the stranger who just arrived. They say Omegas are cursed by the moon goddess. They say a blind wolf brings the shadow of death. Since she arrived, our peace has been shattered. Perhaps she orchestrated this to remove you and claim the crown for her own shadowed allies." Murmurs erupted among the conservative alphas in the room. Seraphina's words were a dangerous spark in a room full of dry tinder. The old guard despised the idea of an Omega Queen, let alone a disabled one. They began to nod, exchanging suspicious glances at the silver-haired girl on the throne. Alaric surged to his feet, a terrifying growl ripping from his throat, ready to tear Seraphina's throat out for the disrespect. But before he could descend the steps, a delicate, pale hand reached out and grasped his wrist. "Alaric, wait." Juliet's voice was soft, yet it possessed a resonant clarity that cut through the murmurs of the crowd. Alaric paused, his chest heaving, his wolf fighting the instinct to kill. He looked down at his mate, and slowly, incredibly, he stepped back, allowing her to take the lead. The sight of the ruthless Iron Wolf yielding to the gentle touch of the blind Omega sent a shockwave of disbelief through the court. Juliet stood up. She did not use a cane. She did not stumble. She walked down the 3 marble steps of the dais with absolute grace, guided by the acoustic reflections of the room and the distinct sense of the people before her. She stopped exactly 3 paces away from Lord Reginald and Lady Seraphina. "You speak of curses, Lady Seraphina," Juliet said, tilting her head slightly as if listening to a distant melody. "You speak of shadows and death, but the dark is not something to fear. The dark is honest. It strips away the lies of a beautiful face and a noble title." Juliet took a deep breath, letting her heightened senses wash over the pair. A normal wolf's resting heartbeat is 60 beats per minute, Juliet stated calmly, her unseeing eyes fixed forward. When a wolf is wrongfully accused, their heart rate spikes with righteous anger. But when a wolf is guilty, and their carefully constructed plan is collapsing, their heart does not just race, it stutters. It skips. It floods their veins with the cold, metallic scent of absolute terror. She took one step closer to Lord Reginald. He stiffened, trying to mask his panic behind a sneer. "Your heart is stuttering, Lord Reginald," she whispered, though the silence in the hall made it sound like a shout. "But a stuttering heart is not proof of treason. Proof is in the details. Wolfsbane has a very distinct scent. It smells like crushed bitter almonds and rotting earth." The assassin was drenched in it. Juliet reached out, moving her hand gracefully through the air until her fingertips hovered just an inch away from the heavy leather scabbard hanging at Reginald's waist. She didn't touch him, but she inhaled deeply. "You handled the blade," she declared, her voice ringing out with absolute certainty. "The scent of bitter almonds is embedded in the leather of your gloves and the edge of your scabbard. You did not just hire him, Reginald. You armed him." Reginald's face drained of color. "Lies! The Omega is lying! She is a witch!" He reached for his sword, a desperate, treasonous reflex. Before his blade could even clear the leather, Alaric was there. The king moved faster than the eye could track. He grabbed Reginald by the throat, lifting the grown alpha off the ground with one hand. "Search him," Alaric commanded his royal guard. 2 guards rushed forward, ripping the leather pouch from Reginald's belt. They emptied its contents onto the floor. Among the gold coins and signet rings rolled a small, thick glass vial. The stopper was secured with black wax, and inside sloshed a dark, purplish liquid. The royal physician stepped forward, kneeling to inspect the vial. He uncorked it, took a cautious sniff, and immediately recoiled. "Concentrated wolfsbane, Your Majesty," identical to the poison on the assassin's blade. The great hall erupted into chaos, but a single deafening roar from Alaric silenced them all. He dropped Reginald to the floor, where the treacherous uncle gasped for air, clutching his bruised throat. Serafina fell to her knees, weeping, realizing her ambition had just signed her death warrant. "Mercy, my king. We were only trying to protect the pack. She is unfit." Alaric looked down at them with cold, dead eyes. "You have mistaken my mate's blindness for blindness of the mind. She sees more clearly than any of you. She is your Luna, and she is the justice of this court." He drew his broadsword, the steel singing a deadly note in the quiet room. "For high treason, for the attempted assassination of the king, the sentence is death." Alaric did not delegate the execution. He swung the blade himself. In one swift, brutal motion, Lord Reginald's head rolled across the marble floor. Serafina screamed, collapsing into a hysterical heap. Alaric wiped his blade calmly on a velvet cloth handed to him by a servant. He looked down at his cousin. "You are stripped of your titles, your wealth, and your pack standing. You are banished to the barren wastes. If you are ever seen within the borders of Oakhaven again, you will join your father." Alaric turned back to the court. The nobility dropped to their knees, bowing their heads so low, their foreheads touched the cold stone floor. Not out of fear of the Iron King, but in absolute, terrifying awe of the blind queen who had orchestrated the downfall of the most powerful house in the kingdom without lifting a single weapon. Juliet stood quietly amidst the scent of blood and fear. Alaric walked back to her, wrapping his warm, blood-spattered arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. "They see you now, my queen," he whispered into her hair. "They see you exactly as you are." With the capital purged of its immediate vipers, Alaric had one final promise to keep. The mate bond demanded retribution for the suffering Juliet had endured, and Alaric's wolf would not rest until the scent of Winterborn's cruelty was eradicated from the earth. A month after the failed coup, a massive royal procession marched north. But this was no diplomatic envoy. It was a legion of 2,000 elite royal guards, their armor painted matte black, their banners displaying the Iron Wolf sigil wrapped in silver vines, a tribute to Juliet's hair. Juliet rode at the front beside Alaric, atop a massive, sure-footed draft horse, specially trained to respond to her gentle weight shifts. The journey back to the highlands brought a storm of conflicting emotions. She could smell the familiar pine needles, the crisp mountain air, and the distant, rushing waters of the winter-born river. But intermingled with the beauty of the land was the suffocating memory of the dark, damp cellar. When they crested the final hill overlooking the winter-born keep, the pack's pathetic defense forces had already dropped their weapons. They knew better than to stand against the sovereign's full military might. Alpha, Cedric, and Beatrice were dragged into the muddy courtyard in chains, surrounded by the terrified members of their pack. The grand tapestries had been torn down. The wealth they had hoarded was being catalogued by royal scribes to be distributed among the commoners they had taxed into starvation. Alaric dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud. He reached up and gently helped Juliet down, keeping her hands securely tucked into the crook of his arm. As they approached, Cedric whimpered, a pathetic sound coming from a man who had ruled with such terror. "My king, please," Cedric begged, keeping his eyes glued to the dirt. "I gave you my home. I gave you a feast. I beg for the mercy of the moon goddess." Alaric's face was an emotionless mask. "You are not speaking to your king today, Cedric. You are facing your Luna. Her word is the only law that matters here." Juliet stepped forward. The silence in the courtyard was absolute. For 20 years, these people had pretended she did not exist. They had walked above her head, feasted while she starved, and ignored her existence to maintain their facade of perfection. Now, the ghost of Winterborn was deciding their fate. She could hear Beatrice crying softly, the scent of her expensive rose perfume now soured with sweat and fear. "You valued perfection above all else." Juliet's voice echoed clearly in the crisp mountain air. "One, you locked me in the dark because my eyes were clouded, believing that what could not be seen could not harm your legacy. You sought to build an empire on a foundation of hidden shame." Cedric trembled, waiting for the executioner's blade to fall. He fully expected her to demand their heads. "But I am not like you, father," she said, the word father dripping with absolute detachment. "I will not spill kin blood and curse the ground of my ancestors. However, you are unfit to lead. You are stripped of your alpha status. Winterborn will be governed by a royal proxy appointed by the king." Juliet paused, turning her unseeing eyes toward the sky, feeling the faint warmth of the sun on her face, a sensation she still reveled in every single day. "As for your punishment," she continued, her tone turning to steel, "you banished me to the darkness so I would not offend your sight. It is only fitting you experience the world as you forced me to. You and Beatrice are banished to the whispering caves in the deepest southern ravines. The sunlight does not reach there. You will live the rest of your days in the pitch black, relying only on your hands and your wits to survive. Let the darkness teach you the humility you failed to learn in the light." A horrified sob broke from Beatrice's lips, but Cedric remained silent, paralyzed by the sheer poetic horror of his sentence. The royal guards immediately hauled them to their feet, dragging them away to the prison wagons. Juliet didn't flinch as their cries faded into the distance. She felt a massive, invisible weight lift from her chest. The cellar was finally empty, both in the keep and within her soul. Before leaving, Alaric ordered his guards down into the keep's foundations. With heavy mauls and iron bars, they shattered the stone roof of the cellar where Juliet had been kept, collapsing the structure entirely. As the dust rose, burying the cage forever, Alaric pulled Juliet into his arms and kissed her deeply, sealing the closure of her past. The true climax of their journey occurred 3 weeks later, back in the sprawling gardens of the Oakhaven Citadel, under the light of a full, silver moon. It was the night of the royal mating ceremony. the sacred ritual that would officially bind their souls before the moon goddess and the kingdom. The ceremony was a masterpiece of sensory devotion, specifically tailored by Alaric for his queen. Because she could not see the visual splendor, the thousands of glowing paper lanterns floating into the sky, or the vibrant silks worn by the nobility, Alaric ensured the night was a symphony for her other senses. The pathway to the moon altar was lined with hundreds of braziers burning sweet cedar, frankincense, and night-blooming jasmine, creating a rich tapestry of scents that guided her steps. The royal choir, 50 voices strong, hummed a deep, resonant, ancient pack hymn that vibrated through the stone tiles and into the soles of her bare feet. Juliet wore a gown woven from gossamer silk and thousands of tiny, clear crystals that chimed softly like wind bells with every step she took. She felt ethereal, powerful, and unconditionally loved. Alaric stood at the altar, waiting for her. When she reached the final step, he took her hands, his thumbs tracing the pulse points on her wrists. The high priest chanted the ancient vows in the old tongue, wrapping a silver cord around their joined hands, binding their wrists together. I, Alaric, king of the 5 realms, alpha of the iron wolves, take you, Juliet, as my equal, my Luna, and my soul. Alaric rumbled, his voice thick with raw emotion. My strength is your shield. My eyes are yours to command. Where you cannot see, I will be your light. And where I am blinded by rage, you will be my clarity. Juliet's breath hitched, tears sliding from her milky blue eyes, not from sorrow, but from a joy so profound it felt like a physical ache in her chest. I, Juliet, she replied, her voice steady and clear, carrying across the silent, reverent crowd. Take you, Alaric, as my mate and my king. I offer you my heart, unburdened by the dark. I will listen to the whispers of your kingdom, I will feel the truth of your enemies, and I will stand by your side until the moon falls from the sky. As the high priest untied the silver cord, Alaric cupped her face and leaned down. The kiss was slow, deep, and electric. The moment their lips met, the final lock on the mate bond clicked into place. A surge of golden, incandescent energy flared through Juliet's mind. For a fleeting, miraculous second, she didn't see with her eyes, but she felt the exact shape of his soul, a roaring, magnificent wolf made of pure starlight, wrapping around her own delicate, fierce spirit. The entire capital erupted into joyous howling. The sound was deafening, a tidal wave of acceptance and love from tens of thousands of wolves, pledging their loyalty to the Iron King and his blind queen. Juliet leaned against her husband's chest, feeling the powerful, steady rhythm of his heart. She had spent 20 years locked in a cellar, told she was a broken, shameful thing. But standing under the moon, surrounded by the roars of a kingdom that bowed to her wisdom, she finally understood the truth. She had never been broken. She had merely been kept in the dark until she was strong enough to rule the light. What an epic journey! From a forgotten cellar to the highest throne, Juliet proved that true vision comes from the heart, and Alaric showed what it means to fiercely protect your mate. If you loved this dramatic tale of the Iron King and his blind Omega Queen, please hit that like button and share it with your fellow romance lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell so you never miss another thrilling werewolf romance story.